The phone rang and nobody asked questions. A voice said one word. Then the line went dead. Somewhere between dinner and darkness, men across the country froze in place, already knowing what it meant. No explanations, no second calls, just a signal that couldn't be taken back. If you got that word, the night was already moving without you. By the time the clocks crossed 9, America was standing on a trapdoor. This wasn't noise in the streets or headlines screaming war. This was quieter, sharper. The kind of violence that starts in living rooms and ends in blood you never see coming. 8 cities, dozens of phones, different voices, same message. A coordinated silence wrapped around one decision. By sunrise, 40 men would be erased. The authorities would spend years tearing their hair out, convinced there had to be codes, meetings, letters, something complicated enough to explain the scale of it. They missed the point. The world that planned this didn't need chatter. It ran on trust, fear, and timing. One instruction was enough. But nights like that don't happen by accident. They're built. That summer, the underworld wasn't exploding. It was suffocating. Power sat in the hands of men who believed age made them untouchable. Gray-haired kings who wore tradition like armor and thought respect meant obedience. They ran things the way they'd always been run, with one man at the top and everyone else kneeling. You didn't argue. You didn't question. And if you did, they made sure nobody remembered your name. They clung to old customs, old bloodlines, old rules dragged across the ocean. They trusted only their own. Anyone who didn't fit the mold was beneath them. These men didn't adapt. They waited for the world to bend back. It wasn't going to. Across the table sat a different breed. Younger, American-made, fluent in English and numbers, not just oaths. They saw rackets the way bankers saw portfolios, profit over pride, alliances over ancestry. If someone made money, they belonged. At the center of that shift was Lucky Luciano. He didn't yell, didn't posture. He listened, watched, and remembered everything. While the old bosses argued over titles, Lucky mapped the future. Not a throne, but a system. Shared power. Votes instead of vendettas. A structure that couldn't be decapitated with one bullet. To the old guard, that idea was poison. They saw him as dangerous not because he was reckless, but because he was calm, because he didn't need permission, because he worked with anyone useful and didn't apologize for it. To them, he wasn't just disrespectful. He was rewriting the rules that kept them alive. And by the end of the summer, the knives were already out. Lucky understood something they didn't. Killing one rival doesn't end a war. It just schedules the next one. As long as those men breathed, they'd regroup, rename themselves, and come back for control. The cycle would never stop. So he stopped thinking small. If power was the problem, he'd remove it everywhere at once. That decision didn't come with speeches or panic. It came quietly behind locked doors, with a list laid out flat and no room for hesitation. Names that ran cities. Names that wouldn't bend. Names that would never accept the future he was building. And once the list was complete, there was no turning back. Because when men like that realize they're about to lose everything, they don't negotiate. They strike first. The first move came before noon, and it came dressed as authority. 4 men walked into a Manhattan office building like they owned the place. Badges out, hats straight, calm steps. Nobody stopped them. Nobody ever stops police. Inside, a man who thought he was untouchable stood up to greet them. He had crowned himself king only months earlier, convinced the city was finally his. What he didn't know was that his crown was already cracked. The door closed behind them. Gunfire didn't echo long. Steel flashed closer than words. By the time the noise stopped, the title of boss of all bosses meant nothing. The body on the floor proved it. 15 guards realized too late that uniforms can lie. By mid-morning, the old world had lost its loudest voice, and every other old boss in America felt it, even if they didn't know why yet. Power doesn't vanish quietly. It creates a vacuum, and vacuums pull desperate men in fast. Lucky understood that better than anyone. If he waited, they'd rush to fill the space. New alliances, emergency meetings, another self-appointed ruler, same war, different names, so he didn't wait. That afternoon, the city might as well have disappeared. Doors locked, curtains drawn. Two men sat across from each other with nothing but time, cigarettes, and a list that could burn the country down. 40 names, not soldiers, generals. Men who controlled territories, crews, money flows. Men who wouldn't argue, wouldn't compromise, wouldn't adapt. Men who would come for Lucky the moment they realized what was changing. They stared at the list in silence. One of them broke it first. "You can't do this one at a time," Mayor said. "They'll feel it, they'll vanish." Lucky didn't look up. "Then we don't do it one at a time." Mayor exhaled slow. "You're talking about cities, plural." Lucky nodded. 8. Even Mayor paused at that. No single crew, no central meeting, no visible coordination. 40 targets in different states, different routines, different protections. Any mistake would expose the whole thing. Lucky tapped the paper. "We don't complicate it. Everyone already knows who the problem is in their city. We just remove permission." Mayor looked at him. "With what?" "One word." That word would do more than issue orders. It would unlock plans already waiting, crews already positioned, guns already cleaned. Everyone would act independently, thinking small, local, contained. Nobody would see the full picture except Lucky. They worked through the list methodically. No emotion, no speeches, just assignments and timing. Each name matched with men who knew the streets, the habits, the blind spots. No overlap, no chatter, no room for confusion. By evening, the city lights came on, and so did the phones. Lucky made the first call himself. No greetings, no build-up, just the word, then silence. He didn't wait for responses, he didn't need them. 5 minutes later, another call, different city, same word, again and again. Some calls went through trusted hands, some through intermediaries who didn't know what they were triggering. But every recipient understood the meaning immediately. No one asked for clarification. In back rooms, men stood up from tables. In clubs, conversations ended mid-sentence. Guns were checked without drama. Jackets went on. Each crew thought this was their night, their problem, their local cleanup. That misunderstanding was the masterpiece. By the time the clock crept toward 9, 40 separate engines were running, all pointed toward violence, all unaware they were part of something much bigger. And none of the men marked for death had any idea the countdown had already started. The first man died while his food was still hot. He sat with his back to the wall, the way cautious men always do, convinced caution was enough. 2 figures crossed the room without urgency. No masks, no hesitation. The guns came up, the table exploded, and it was over before anyone screamed. 15 seconds of noise, then chairs scraping as the shooters walked out like they'd paid the bill. That was New York. Minutes later, Chicago caught its breath at a red light. 2 cars side by side. One window rolled down. A burst of thunder ripped through the night. By the time the light turned green, one driver was slumped over the wheel, his future scattered across the dashboard. Traffic moved again. Nobody chased. Nobody asked questions. Detroit didn't even get that warning. A man stepped into his car, thinking about nothing more dangerous than the drive home. The key turned. The night split open. When the smoke cleared, there wasn't enough left to recognize him without paperwork. Philadelphia was colder. A familiar restaurant, a familiar table, the kind of routine that feels like safety after years of survival. 2 men approached, close enough to see recognition flash in his eyes. He didn't get time to beg. The shots were precise. Final. Then the killers sat down, finished the meal, and left coins on the table. Across the country, variations of the same ending played out. Bedrooms, alleyways, back pews, brothels, cars parked where they always parked, homes where wives slept in the next room. Some never saw the men who killed them. Some did and understood exactly why just before the lights went out. Different methods, same outcome. What made it terrifying wasn't the violence, it was the timing. Each crew believed they were settling a local score, a necessary move. None of them knew dozens of other men were falling at the same moment. No one realized the scale. No one needed to. By midnight, the old guard was bleeding out across 8 cities. By 3 in the morning, there was nothing left to bleed. Not one crew missed. Not one target slipped away. No last-minute warnings. No botched jobs. 40 names crossed off without a single mistake. And the man who ordered it never heard a gunshot. He slept. When morning came, phones rang again, but this time it was police stations lighting up. Bodies found, scenes secured, reports stacking faster than anyone could read them. At first it looked like chaos, local beefs, power struggles, revenge. Then the numbers started lining up. Same night, same window of time. Same kind of men. By mid-morning, agents were staring at maps with pins scattered across the country, trying to understand how something this big left nothing behind. No meetings, no messages, no trail, just silence. They suspected the truth immediately. They just couldn't touch it. Because the man they were watching had never left his apartment. The records said so. The doorman swore to it. The phones went quiet early. No witnesses, no evidence, nothing to grab. By the time they realized what had happened, it was already finished. And the world those 40 men controlled, it was wide open. But power never stays empty for long. And Lucky Luciano was already planning what came next. 3 days later, the room felt heavier than the smoke. Men who used to posture now sat still. Men who once spoke over others waited their turn. Every face at the table understood the same thing. Something irreversible had happened, and whoever controlled the next sentence would control the future. Lucky stood, not above them, just centered. No guards flanking him. No show. He didn't need theater. The absence of 40 rivals had already said enough. The past is finished, he said calmly. Every man who believed one voice should rule us all is gone. They're not hiding. They're not regrouping. They're done. No one challenged that. He let the silence work. We don't replace them with another tyrant. We don't start chasing crowns. From now on, power is shared. New York gets 5 families, equal weight. Disagreements get settled with votes, not funerals. Eyes moved around the table. Italians, Jews, Irish. Men who would have been enemies a year earlier now listening like shareholders. Lucky kept going. No boss of bosses, no single throne to aim at. We run this like a business, structured, predictable, profitable. Someone finally spoke carefully. And if someone decides they want more. Lucky's expression didn't change. His voice didn't rise. Then we remind them what happens when people ignore the rules. Nobody needed clarification. Everyone in that room had heard the whispers. 40 men erased in one night. No warnings, no survivors, no proof. The message was carved deep enough to last generations. No votes against him were cast. What they built in that room didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. It rewired the underworld. For decades, crime would run smoother, quieter, smarter. Not because violence disappeared, but because it was controlled. Law enforcement never stopped digging. Files grew thick. Theories stacked up. Agents replayed timelines, chased ghosts, tried to find the meeting that never happened. They knew who was responsible, they just couldn't prove it. Years later, under bright lights and cameras, politicians asked questions they already knew the answers to. Witnesses shrugged. I don't know nothing. I wasn't there. I heard rumors. The silence held. When reporters asked Lucky directly, he smiled the way men do when they're 3 moves ahead. A lot of things happened that night, he said. I was home, sleeping. You can ask the doorman. And that was all he ever gave them, because the truth didn't need defending. One list, a handful of calls, one word delivered at the right moment. That night proved something the underworld never forgot. You don't need to be loud to be deadly. You don't need to pull the trigger to control the outcome. You don't need chaos when precision will do. And once you understand that, once everyone else understands, you understand it too. You never have to say more than one word again.